That night, I had dinner plans with a friend. After we said our goodbyes, I stepped out of the bar, feeling drained. The streets were nearly empty, eerily quiet. The light at the bus stop flickered weakly, swaying in the night like a dying star. A few minutes later, I saw a pair of headlights cutting through the dark. The bus crept toward me and stopped with a gentle hiss. I tapped my card and stepped on board. As the doors opened, I glanced inside. A few people were scattered near the front. The back half of the bus was empty. Wanting some peace, I walked to the rear and took a seat. Outside the window, the city lights smeared into streaks. Reflections danced across the glass. I leaned back and started scrolling through my phone, mindlessly flicking through social media, not really absorbing anything, just waiting for my stop. The bus rocked softly as it rolled through a few more stops. Then the door opened again, and a woman got on. I glanced up. She wore an off-white trench coat, slightly parted at the bottom to reveal a light grey silk dress. On her feet were deep red stilettos, but she walked without a sound, like her heels were sinking into cotton. The strangest thing was the small black hat she wore, pulled so low, it nearly covered her entire face. She moved unhurriedly down the aisle, all the way to where I was sitting. Without hesitation, she sat down right next to me. The whole row was empty, and yet she chose the seat right beside mine. My brow furrowed. I slowly lowered my phone and glanced at her. She sat perfectly still. She didn't speak. She didn't look at me. Just kept her head bowed, hands folded neatly on her knees, her posture almost unnaturally proper. I went back to my phone, but a thought nagged at me. Something about her is off. A few minutes passed, and I started to feel her body subtly leaning toward me. At first it was barely noticeable, but soon I could feel her arm nearly brushing mine. I shifted closer to the window, pressing myself against the glass. The closeness made my skin crawl. Then she leaned in even more, her body now fully pressed against mine. I held my breath, trying to stay calm, willing myself to ignore it. But then, her face turned. She stared directly at my phone screen, not moving. Her skin was pale, but her lips curled slightly, as if what she was seeing amused her. Even more disturbing, she looked down at the screen, then slowly smiled. "Could you not sit so close?" I finally muttered. She didn't reply, didn't blink, just kept staring at the screen. Chills broke out all over me. I jumped up, ready to move to the front of the bus. Then she grabbed my wrist. Her grip was inhumanly strong. Her knuckles turned white with the force, as if something deep inside her refused to let go. Pain shot up my arm. I couldn't pull away. I shouted, "Let go of me." My voice caught the attention of the other passengers. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Hey, miss, what are you doing?" Someone yelled from the front. Only then did she release me. I stumbled back, almost collapsing, then scrambled toward the front. The bus fell into an eerie silence. No one said a word. No one came to help. I didn't dare look back. I sat down near the driver, still shaking. My wrist throbbed with pain, a red ring already forming where her fingers had been. I looked over my shoulder. She was still sitting there, quietly smiling at me. I couldn't stay. Even though my stop hadn't come, I pressed the button and waited. The moment the doors opened, I bolted off the bus. I stood on the sidewalk, gasping for breath, watching the bus disappear into the distance. Just before it turned the corner, I saw her move. She stood, slid into the window seat, and pressed her face to the glass, still smiling. That same blank, emotionless smile. I instinctively stepped back until the bus vanished from view. That was the last time I ever took that route. I never saw her again. One holiday, I got on a bus heading into town. There were only a few passengers scattered around. The air inside was stuffy, like the heavy pressure before a storm. It pressed on my chest and made it hard to breathe. I picked a window seat, put on my headphones, and started scrolling through my phone. A few stops passed, and the bus came to a halt. Someone got on. I looked up. It was an elderly man, probably in his 70s. He wore a khaki jacket over a white shirt, a baseball cap, and silver-rimmed glasses. His face looked calm beneath them. He sat one row ahead, a bit to the left, and pulled out his phone, squinting at the screen with a slight frown, as if reading something carefully. There was a quiet, fragile presence about him. Then I noticed the woman standing next to him. She was tall, unusually tall, and dressed entirely in black. A long dress, white gloves on her hands, her back perfectly straight. At first, I assumed she was just another passenger, but something felt off. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there beside the old man, close and naturally close, even though the bus had plenty of empty seats. I glanced at her a few more times, then tried to refocus on my phone. I closed my eyes and pretended to nap, but I kept peeking, just enough to keep her in my line of sight. She didn't move an inch. Then things got strange. Her neck, it started to grow, not stretch, but grow, bending upward from her shoulders like a boneless snake. The end of it reached the handrail near the ceiling. Her head was now higher than the rail, nearly touching the roof of the bus. From the top of that long, flexible neck, her jet black hair hung down in thick, heavy strands, almost brushing the floor. That neck, long and tubular, continued to silently extend downward. Her hair followed, slowly swaying, brushing against the old man's shoulder. He flinched slightly, reached up to scratch his neck, probably thinking it was just an itch. He didn't notice anything unusual. But then, the neck began to coil, first loop around his neck, second loop over his shoulder, another loop tighter. Tight enough that the skin on his neck started turning red. His expression changed, his frown deepened. The corner of his mouth twitched, like he wanted to speak, but couldn't. His chest began to heave. His hands clutched the back of the seat in front of him, and sweat started to bead on his forehead. My heart was racing. I didn't dare move. That awful neck continued to tighten, wrapping around him. It had a will of its own. And still, she didn't move, rigid as a post, her feet planted to the floor. Her long black hair drifted slightly, as though even the air was shivering in fear. Then the man let out a low groan and collapsed forward, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. The sound snapped the rest of the passengers into motion. People shouted. Some rushed forward. Someone called 911. The driver pulled over immediately. I stood up too, but I didn't go near her. I couldn't. She was still standing there, still wrapped tightly around him. But nobody else saw her, not a single person. A few minutes later, the ambulance arrived. The EMTs boarded and lifted the man onto a stretcher, and that woman, the one only I could see, followed. She didn't walk. That long, serpent-like neck dragged her along, still latched onto the man, still silent, still unseen. Right before the doors closed, I saw her lift her head. There was no face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank, skin-colored surface, framed by a curtain of jet black hair. The next morning, I saw the news. An elderly man had collapsed on a city bus and died en route to the hospital. Cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest. No mention of anything strange on the bus, no woman, no witnesses, as if the whole thing had only happened in my head. I worked the night shift at a convenience store. That day, I got off 15 minutes early. It was raining outside, not heavy, but dense and sharp, like thousands of needles pricking my skin. I didn't have an umbrella, so I pulled my jacket over my head and jogged to the bus stop. The last bus was scheduled for 11:45 p.m., heading from downtown to the northern suburbs, passing right by my house. I was the only one waiting. I stood there with my shoulders hunched, shivering, my phone nearly out of battery. That's when I saw headlights slowly appear at the end of the street. I let out a breath, relieved that it was finally here. But as the bus got closer, something felt off. It was taller than usual, with a body so dark I could barely make out its color. The license plate was smeared with rain, completely unreadable. And the way it moved, it was too slow, unnaturally slow. When the bus finally stopped, I instinctively stepped back. Water splashed from under the tires, cold rain hitting my face. I raised my arm to shield my eyes and squinted, trying to see inside. And that's when I saw the faces, rows and rows of them, pressed up against the windows, staring at me. Men, women, old, young, all of them completely still. No expression, no movement, like time had frozen them in place. Their pale skin was pressed flat against the glass. Their eyes were empty, lifeless. Their mouths drooped slightly open, like corpses waiting for burial. And the most unsettling part, their faces all looked the same. A chill shot up my spine. My fingertips went numb. This wasn't just a wrong bus. This wasn't a bus meant for the living. I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the pavement. The doors opened with a low hiss. The driver sat hunched over the wheel, wearing a faded uniform. His navy jacket had an old transit company logo stitched into it, something I hadn't seen in over a decade. His head hung low, his cap pulled down so far I couldn't see his face. Just the edge of a shriveled chin, and a neck so pale it looked bloodless. But it was his hands that terrified me. They were resting on the steering wheel, not gripping it, but stuck to it like his skin had melted into the plastic. His knuckles were swollen and stiff. His fingernails were yellowed and cracked, almost blackened at the tips. Those weren't the hands of someone alive. Those were the hands of something pulled out of a coffin. I turned and ran. I didn't stop to look back. I didn't even breathe aloud. I just ran through an alley, across an empty lot, over puddles and through the dark until I reached the front steps of the town's church. I didn't go home that night. I stayed there, in the church, curled up on a bench, trying to keep warm. I managed to sleep for a few hours. Chicago's winter rain cuts like a blade. At 1:15 in the morning, after working overtime, I stood at the bus stop stamping my feet for warmth. My breath swelled in the lamplight. My phone showed that the next bus wouldn't arrive for another 47 minutes. I was just debating whether to call a ride when an old city bus rolled silently into the station. Its body was rusted all over. The faded 136 on the front looked like a ghost of a number left over from the last century. The windows glowed a sickly yellow, and there were no route indicators. The door creaked open. The driver wore a faded cap pulled low over his face. "Does this go to Lincoln Park?" I asked. He gave a mechanical nod. I was too cold to care how weird it felt. I just climbed aboard. A few passengers were scattered throughout the dim interior. A man in a suit dozing in the front row, a couple in the middle scrolling through a phone together, a young guy in the back with headphones on, a man in a blue sweater, and an old woman in a faded floral dress sitting in the priority seat. I took the seat right behind the old woman. The leather cushion was damp and reeked of mildew. When the engine started, the whole bus shuddered, and the dashboard glowed with a strange green light. Rain tapped on the windows, like fingers gently scratching the glass. The old woman spoke suddenly. Her voice was raspy, like sandpaper against bone. She raised a bony hand from her lap and pointed at the man in the blue sweater. That's when I noticed her left ring finger was missing its tip, ending in a bruised, necrotic stump. The man in the sweater had been nodding off, but the moment she pointed at him, he jolted violently. His face flushed dark red, his skin ballooned and blistered. Then, his sweater tore open at the chest. Greenish ribs pushed out like reaching limbs, cracking and curling in on themselves. His entire body imploded, collapsing in on itself in an impossible way until all that remained was the blue sweater, crumpled and empty on the seat. On the charred center of the fabric, a number appeared. 1, 2. Her dry lips moved again. The number echoed in the enclosed space. I turned toward the man in the suit. His head, which had been bowed, suddenly tilted back at a grotesque angle. Thick, dark bruises curled around his neck like a garrote. In the next moment, his body began to vanish, erased like chalk, starting from his tie. Inch by inch, he faded away into nothing. Left behind was a crumpled business card on the seat. A scorched hole in the center burned the shape of the number 2. I clutched the metal pole beside me. No one else seemed to notice anything. Not even the windows reflected anything but my own distorted image. The bus entered a tunnel I didn't recognize. Emergency lights on the walls flashed green, then red, casting every passenger in an otherworldly glow. 3. Her finger bent and pointed toward the couple. The girl was smiling until her smile froze mid-laugh, like time had snapped. Her pupils lost focus. Her phone slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a loud thud. Her auburn hair drained to grey. Her skin cracked and peeled away like brittle porcelain. Even the shock on her face crumbled with her. In a few seconds, she disintegrated into fine ash that scattered with the bus's movement, leaving only her boyfriend, still holding an empty coat in his arms. On the seat beside him, a number emerged in the shifting light. 3, 4. The boyfriend was staring in confusion at the coat in his lap. Then he shivered, and suddenly turned to face me. His eyes were red, his mouth wide open, as if screaming silently. Cracks raced up from his chest, like dried mud. His body crumbled quietly, drifting into nothing. The seat rocked gently where he had sat. On the backrest, a fresh mark had been carved into the plastic. 4. The tunnel seemed endless. The mileage on the dashboard ticked upward at an impossible speed, but the bus slowed to a crawl. The young man in the back removed his headphones, confused. He was the only one left. 5. The old woman scratched at her seat with a broken fingernail. The young man began convulsing. A dark red liquid seeped out from beneath his cap. Cracks webbed across his collar. He tried to stand, but his legs collapsed like melted wax. Soon, only his earbuds remained, tangled around the armrest. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. At some point, the rain had stopped. It was replaced by the slow, wet drip of something thick. Blood-red fluid seeped from beneath the old woman's dress, trickling down her legs and pooling on the floor, then, impossibly, crawling upward. It slithered over the seat, drawing out a crooked, wet 5. She slowly turned toward me. Her cloudy eyes bulged from their sockets. I smelled rot mixed with cheap perfume. Bits of bone were stuck between her blackened teeth. As I watched, the skin on her face began to peel away in sheets, revealing rotten muscle beneath. The bus burst out of the tunnel. Outside the windows was a field of graves stretching to the horizon. The headstones rose like bones from the earth. The bus accelerated. The rusted frame screamed in protest. The old woman stood, vertebrae cracking with each step. When her gaze landed on me, I finally noticed raindrops on the window were flowing upward. The dark red fluid at her feet reflected not this bus, but one filled with bones. Well, she grinned, her mouth splitting wide to reveal black gums. A little fledgling, sneaking onto my bus. I slammed the emergency stop button, but it was rusted solid, useless. In the rearview mirror, I saw the driver's cap fall away, revealing a skull with strands of brittle grey hair. The old woman stepped closer. Her shadow stretched and twisted across the floor, curling like a noose. She smiled wider. White maggots wriggled between her gums. As her broken finger reached for my forehead, I grabbed the emergency hammer and smashed the window. The glass shattered. Cold air surged in, and I threw myself into the dark. I blacked out before I hit the ground. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. The police reviewed the surveillance footage. It showed me alone at the bus stop, suddenly collapsing, flailing at nothing, then lying motionless until someone found me. But last night, just after 10 p.m., a city bus crashed near the entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel. Authorities suspect brake failure, possibly triggered by the driver's medical condition. The bus veered into a restricted zone, flipped, and caught fire. The The driver and 5 passengers were killed on the spot.